Good afternoon. I want to welcome everyone to a very special edition of the TCU and UTMC School of Medicine's FWMD live chat being done in collaboration with TCU Magazine. Today, we will be discussing the impact of giving, how philanthropy has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and how gift giving remains an important part of building relationships between community members. Before I introduce our guests, I would like to thank our partners who helped bring this discussion together today, and that is TCU University's Advancement and their team, the TCU Alumni Association, and also DNAWorks. Now, I'm your host, Prescott Stokes III, the Integrated Content and Marketing Manager here at the TCU and UTMC School of Medicine, and I'm happy to welcome our first guest, Arnold Gachman. How you doing, Mr. Gachman?
I'm great. How are you, Prescott?
All right, I'm doing great. We are so happy to have you. I want to let everybody watching know that Mr. Gachman is the chairman of Gamtex Industries, a 107-year-old family-owned recycling business. He graduated from TCU in 1964 with a BBA in finance, and 3 generations of his family have attended TCU. He has served as the president or chair of many industry, civic, and governmental organizations. His recent focus has emphasized healthcare excellence, educational advancement, and community development. He is married to Harriet Gachman, and they have 2 children and 4 grandchildren. And Mr. Gachman and his wife, Harriet, are both founding donors of the TCU and UTMC School of Medicine. And Mr. Gachman also serves on TCU's National Campaign Committee as well. Now, I would like to welcome our second panelist, Dr. Michelle Ramos. How are you doing, Dr. Ramos?
Doing well. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
All right. We are happy to have you with us today. And I'm going to let everybody know that Dr. Ramos is a licensed attorney with a Ph.D. in cultural psychology. She has significant organizing experience and has committed her career to serving communities and individuals adversely impacted by issues of race, gender, disability, class, socioeconomics, inequitable laws, and systemic oppression. She leads Alternate Roots, and her work focuses on shifting power to Black and Brown people through pushing boundaries, challenging status quo, and reflecting values of equity and justice in her day-to-day practice. Now, before leading Alternate Roots, she worked as the managing director for the Vera Institute of Justice in New Orleans and a program officer for the Women's Foundation of California. She also serves on the boards of Dance USA and Performing Arts Alliance as well. And I would like to welcome our third guest, Jeremy Smith, to our panel today. How are you doing, Jeremy?
I'm doing well. Great to be here.
All right, we are happy to have you. And I want to let everybody know that Mr. Smith is the president of the Rainwater Charitable Foundation. He joined the foundation in April of 2009. Now, the foundation's areas of giving include birth through 12th grade education, neurodegenerative disease research, and education-related gifts in East Africa. Prior to joining the Rainwater team, he worked in management consulting with McKinsey & Company. And prior to working for McKinsey, he worked in operations research at Merck & Company. Smith is a graduate of the Harvard Business School, the Harvard Divinity School, and the University of Arkansas, where he graduated with a BS in engineering. He also currently serves as a board member at the Commit Partnership, the Tarrant To and Through Partnership, the Dallas Foundation, and the North Texas Community Foundation. And our final panelist, last but not least, I would like to welcome Ms. Paula Parker. How are you doing, Mrs. Parker?
Doing great. Happy to be here.
All right, we are happy to have you. And I want to let everybody watching know that Ms. Parker is a native Texan and graduated from TCU in 1977, and she holds a master's degree in nursing from Sacred Heart University. Volunteerism and community service are big for her and her husband, Ron, and their 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Their deep dive into philanthropy led them to focus on health, education, and issues that affect women and children. Mrs. Parker is constantly exploring ways to give back and support others in their educational journeys as well. In addition to establishing TCU's first endowed athletic scholarship, her family has supported the TCU Harris College of Nursing and Health Sciences by recently creating an endowed professorship in nursing. They also serve on TCU's National Campaign Committee as well. Now, I would like everyone watching to jump in the comments and let us know where you're watching us from, and we'll give you a shout out on screen as we chat. And also, if you have questions for our panelists as we have this discussion, just jump into the comments, leave your question, and then we will try to get as many of those questions answered as possible. But before we get to those questions, we're going to begin our conversation talking about how the events of 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of changed people's thoughts of giving. So, Arnie, I want to begin with you. You know, the COVID-19 pandemic showed that the world has work to do in many areas, and healthcare is also included. We've learned a lot about the disparities in global healthcare, and that's been well documented. But when you think about giving, how do you think about where you want to put your money and be strategic about it, where your money can make the most impact?
Arnie, I believe you're muted.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's okay.
That's a really wonderful question to ask because it has so many answers to it. When the COVID first hit us, my first thought was, what can we do for our community? So I looked immediately to the food banks, and a group of us mobilized, and we were able to talk with the food bank. They are actually a neighbor of my company, and we helped them through a number of different donations and solicitations of others to create food opportunities in the community. After I did that, then I began to realize from my experience with the hospital, our frontline workers, because they were going to be impacted not only from the standpoint of COVID itself, but just from being overwhelmed in the emergency rooms and in the different treatment centers. And how are we going to deal with that? So we got together, and Harriet and I decided to provide meals to both Baylor and to Cook Children's. And that was another area. So what we did was refocus some of our activities away from the normal charities that we would be giving to and mobilized it to help where we saw an immediate need.
And you know, Arnie, being that you and your wife are founding donors of the medical school, so you've kind of put your money into healthcare and specifically medical education, prior to 2020, right? Because the medical school was coming on board prior to 2020 with our first class starting in 2019. So what made you so passionate about joining and putting money into a brand new medical school with a new approach to creating medical education?
Well, it actually started with I becoming a member of the Board of Trustees at Baylor All Saints many years ago. Through that experience, the chamber asked me to become involved with UNT Health Science Center and help them to become more visible in our community. As I did that, and I learned about the issues of TCOM not having slots for residents and teaching in the Metroplex, and Texas being at that time 4,000 physicians short. So I said to myself, this is an area that really needs our help. And so we began to put together a plan, and our plan was to go to the Texas legislature and try to get TCOM to be able to have 2 degrees, which didn't work, very honestly. And then by the grace of God, I believe it was just unbelievable how timing went, that Victor Boschini and Mike Williams got together and created this partnership. I think it's just the divine intervention in my mind. And so that led to me saying, wow, here we have an opportunity now to teach in Fort Worth. I had gone to Baylor 15 years ago asking why we are not a teaching hospital in Fort Worth, because what came out of that was the vision that Fort Worth could be a medical destination on its own. I don't know how many people realize that we do transplant here. We do tremendous heart work. We do cancer work all across the Fort Worth area. There's a great DNA lab. There's a nursing facility. There's just so many of the parts that would make a medical destination, that this is the passion that Harriet and I looked at and said, golly, we want to be a part of this, and we're willing to do whatever we can to do it, and even if we have to stretch.
And Arnie, I do want to ask you one thing about the partnership between the TCU and UNT School of Medicine and Baylor Scott and White All Saints Medical Center in Fort Worth, and creating graduate medical education slots. Now, when you and your wife invested in the school and became donors, it's really far off. So you're not sure if that's going to happen. But when you think about being a donor and being in philanthropy, do you kind of have to have this far-sighted vision where you have to be kind of headstrong that these things can come to fruition?
I believe that when you get out there and make it happen, it happens. You have to have determination, and you have to have enough vision, and then you have to have what I was always told. You have to be a bit of a salesman. You have to take and share it with others and try to build that team effort to get something done. And I would say what really was a great opportunity was when Baylor, and I don't just say Baylor, the entire medical community of Fort Worth got behind by giving tremendous financial support to TCU's medical school and to UNT's medical school. Other facilities are doing teaching and have been all along. But I just want to say that the opportunity came from Baylor because they had not been a teaching hospital, and now they have the ability to raise that to 125 interns and residents. So right. Yes, it's something that we have to be accredited, and this was the big deal. And the gift of the first year's tuition is a tremendous part of that. Someone gave the third year tuition anonymously. What a gift, because that assures our students that they have an opportunity. And then the hospital's making millions and millions of dollars of commitment to teach students is another part of it. So yes, I'm very much passionate about seeing that gets done and following through with it.
All right. And that's just great to hear. And, now that we continue to just talk about 2020 and just the events around the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Ramos, when you think about who and what needs the most resources when you're a donor and you're in philanthropy, with so many areas being affected by the pandemic, how do you know which one to reach out to first?
Absolutely. And I would love to clarify before I respond to that answer. In my role at Alternate Roots, which is a 45-year-old organization that supports artists that do work in social justice in the South, we act as sort of a hybrid, as a re-grantor for some of the larger national organizations, but then we also work as a service agency for our members. And so for us, that answer is easy. All you have to do is follow the history of the money. And we know that less than 4% of all national funding comes to the South. And we also knew during COVID times, based on the data, that was where the impact was being felt the most, due to the disproportionate number of Black and brown folks that are of low income. And, the majority of our membership in our Alternate Roots family are at or below poverty level. And so we knew immediately that none of the national funding that was being, aggregated and sent out was going to reach our folks. And so we knew that we needed to partner with a lot of our other like-minded membership organizations, NALAC, National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, First Peoples Fund, to advocate for us to get money to our region, to our people, and prioritizing them as needing the funds that were going to be dispersed.
And Jeremy, when you think about just being in Fort Worth and the Rainwater Foundation, Charitable Foundation, what was the approach to who and what needed the most resources throughout 2020?
Well, I think for us, our focus has always been on children and particularly within education. But I think the disparities in education very much correlate to the disparities in global health. And so, what we do is, when you look at census tracts across Fort Worth, you'll see no matter what metric you look at, such as income or perinatal mortality rates, you'll see that, areas that have been historically and intentionally excluded from the American dream by, slavery and then Jim Crow laws and then redlining and other persistent policies have left parts of our community perpetually disadvantaged, and that's the root behind all of these inequalities. And so what we do is really focus on those very communities. We also have a focus on Hispanic communities as well, particularly new immigrant communities, and we really, focus on. So that's been our focus. So I guess the short answer to your question is, the events of 2020, exacerbated what has already been some very challenging times for people in these communities. And so, for us, we just redoubled our effort in those things.
Right. And Mrs. Parker, I also want you to comment on this about thinking about who and what needs the most resources or needed the most resources during 2020. What was your approach to giving?
So I really agree with Jeremy there. We've always given, but I did know that the communities that were hit the hardest were the ones who were the working class people out there, the hourly workers and people of color. So we just concentrated our giving on trying to help that part. Those people who may not know where to go for help or ask for help. So we just kind of sought out agencies that we could filter through and help those people. For instance, we had, I worked with another organization and we were given a grant, and it was just a simple grant of $1,000. And we were charged with finding some kind of community organization that serves people in need. And we ended up doing a childcare agency that had been around for 50 years, minority owned, had been hit hard with the pandemic. People, were shut down. They didn't have jobs, so they were staying at home. So that affected the childcare agency. So we gave them $1,000 because there were some people who were considered essential workers and they were still bringing their kids to this agency. So we did our research and we found out about them and we worked with them and they were so grateful because they're not the big agency that always gets the funding from foundations and stuff like that. They depend on regular people to help them out.
Right. And we did have a question that came in while you all were talking from Judy Burness. Judy, thank you for your question. And the question is, what is the best way to encourage people to give? Arnie, in your experience of giving, what has been the best strategy to bring other people along and convince them that being a philanthropist and donating time and money is important?
Well, I'm glad you said time, because I think part of the things that people think of is just writing a check. So it's really the combination of getting people involved and having them share a vision of what is worthwhile for them to see as their passion and share that. In some cases, it's important, whatever the charity or the interest is, that there is a feedback. And when you give something, that it's appreciated, no matter what it is, whether it's time or money, that people feel like they can become a part, that they're trusted, and that they're being appreciated for what they're doing, no matter how big or small the gift is. To me, the most important thing is that they're willing to be a part. And from that you build. And eventually you'd be surprised how people will take that.
And Dr. Ramos, I also want to just get your take on encouraging people to give as well. When you think about so many of the smaller organizations and in communities throughout the South that need that kind of help, that are on the ground with the people who can be affected the most, what is your message to people who want to help and donate?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, I think that we can probably all collectively acknowledge that it's pretty difficult for large philanthropy to get to folks on the ground, generally speaking. It's the reason why Alternate Routes exists as an intermediary to funnel those funds. But one of the great lessons I think that I have learned as a regranter and as someone who is supporting all these community-based organizations, on the ground organizations, community organizers, is that, we are pretty self-resourceful. Alternate Roots became a pillar partner organization as part of the Southern Power Fund, which was a ground-up collective of organizations and folks that were in philanthropy who understood the challenges of philanthropy and the hoops you have to jump through to get the funding and recognize there's a better way to do things. And this collective came together probably about the spring of last year with a goal to raise $10 million and to raise it from individuals, not to lean into philanthropy, to really resource ourselves. It was a really community, groundswell that occurred. And that has turned into a $16 million fund that continues to be funded, that is allocating funds to individuals, to organizations, without all of the hoops you have to jump through, right? It's just a nominations process that, people who were awarded a fund nominated folks that they knew in their inner circles. The residual of the fund is going to be created into a community controlled fund, because we know that people in communities know what's best for them. And we know that in a time of crisis, especially during the time of COVID, the last thing that people need is to be asked for data, is to be asked to fill out an oppressive application that we know like totally prioritizes white folks and folks with higher education. And so we took that and said, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to do this from the ground up. And it has been hugely successful. And there are other models of that all across the country now, where people are starting to recognize, you know what, there's a whole nother way of doing things. And we need to represent ourselves, because we know what we need and we know what our communities need. And so we need to lead ourselves. And a lot of philanthropists were totally on board with that, and some weren't. And for those that weren't, we said no thank you to the money. And I have to be honest, it was one of the very first times in my entire career that I said no thank you to money. But we felt so strongly that we weren't going to do the status quo thing when it came to this fund. So it was something I was really proud of to be a part of, and something that I think really shows what communities can do if you trust them to do what's best for themselves.
Right. So that's great. And that's just really, really good on two different perspectives that Dr. Ramos just gave, and also that Arnie gave. But at the end of the day, it's all about giving and giving back to the community and making sure you're touching the people who you want to help and who need it the most. So we'll talk more about that as our discussion goes along. You can jump in the comments and leave a question for anyone on our panel, and then we will definitely try to get you some answers. But right now, let's take a few minutes to look back at how the medical students from the class of 2023 at the TCU and UTMC School of Medicine did their part in the Fort Worth community by giving back, and then also continuing their medical studies during the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's take a quick look.
Having to adjust from being in person and getting to know each other and all that in 2019, and then we were completely online for most of 2020. It had the potential to kind of split us apart and lead to less talking and all that, but really I think it brought us together more.
And compared to the traditional model, you are studying and immersing yourself in every specialty for your core clerkships over the course of 40 or more weeks.
Second-year students at TCU and UNT Health Science Center of School of Medicine are starting immersive training inside the hospital.
What was most helpful from TLIC and even our clinical skills courses was learning all of the physical exam skills that we needed to perform on patients. A lot of the tricks and tips that we were given, I really was able to apply in the clinical setting.
And the process of having all of our specialties in rotation at the same time, that makes us a more well-rounded student as we progress through our clerkships.
These LEAP sessions are very robust. For example, week 1 was abdominal pain. And so we take this chief complaint and we look at it through the different disciplines in medicine. And in doing so, that prepares us for STEP or USMLE, where we're looking at things at a foundational level, at a biochemical level, and understanding how everything ties together.
And then we also look for ways to support the community. So the biggest thing was the PPE drive.
We were able to affect and help out so many different healthcare workers, homeless people in nursing homes.
One of our classmates organized virtual blood drive, something that's easy, takes 45 minutes out of your day, and you end up saving multiple lives. So that's always fun when I get a little emails like, hey, your blood was used. It's still really, really cool to feel like, you're able to help in just a small way.
The initiative that I found to be the most rewarding was the school supply drive that was done for the local public schools here in Fort Worth. With all the other uncertainties out there, at least added a little bit of security when it came to resources for those schools, and being able to contribute to that, I found really rewarding in a time where so much of this is up in the air.
I've delivered a couple times just to see the gratitude and the looks on people's faces. It was really meaningful, and because ultimately we want to support Fort Worth and the DFW area, and when it was most in need, we really did come together.
All right, so that was a great video just highlighting the class of 2023 at the TCU and UTMC School of Medicine and what they went through during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, continuing medical school, and also doing a little bit of philanthropy on their own and giving back at the same time to frontline healthcare workers here in Fort Worth. So now I want to move our discussion along to the impact of innovation on giving. So TCU's most recent campaign was about facilities, and now the university is in the midst of $1 billion effort, and it's all intended to support people and programs. So Ms. Parker, I just want to get your take on how philanthropy has evolved and how you've seen the culture change around philanthropy.
In a sense, it took us a while to even call ourselves philanthropists, because we've grown up in families where we've always given. It's, you live in a community, you help your neighbor, you help your church member, you help somebody. So for the longest, if somebody called me a philanthropist, I was really, really uncomfortable. But I'm learning to put that skin on and wear it and own it, because we actually do. We are philanthropists, and it had to be proven to me, because we're just so blessed, and so things were done for us and our families when we were younger, and I think it's like the Bible verse says in Luke. To whom much is given, much is required. So we felt like it was our obligation to give back. So we've been involved with TCU, but I also served on some boards that were women funding organizations. And that's how I did a deep dive into philanthropy, because, they taught us about philanthropy. We talked about it. We did grants. And we did grants for emerging organizations, those who would not be looked at by the big foundations, but were doing good work. And like Ms. Ramos said, boots on the ground. They're right there doing the stuff that needs to be done, helping those people who are interacting with people one-on-one. So I've seen it evolve from people thinking that, and I was one of them, that philanthropy, you had to have a lot of money, and you have to, when you write checks, you do big checks. But I see that most of the giving is done by regular people, and that $20 here, $100 there, and that's the most effective way. And it also, when you give, you feel better too, and you're affecting the change. So I just think it's evolved from thinking that you had to be super rich to, I can do something too. So I think, and that's what I do when I tell people. I said, everybody can give. Everybody has something to give. Time, money, everybody has something to give. Time is kind of difficult now with the pandemic. We can't always go and volunteer, but, there are still things you just get, creative, and there are ways that you can help.
And, I kind of want to just dive a little bit deeper into that idea of philanthropy being the realm of people who are already wealthy. Jeremy, when you think about what the Rainwater Foundation is doing, how can we get people to think differently about what and how they give, and also how all generations can become equally enthusiastic about giving, because it takes a community effort, right?
Yes, I'm glad you didn't ask me about how philanthropy has evolved. I don't actually think big philanthropy has evolved much at all. There's been some interesting writing about that, but recently there's been some interesting books about that. But I do think that I very much agree that it's not the realm of the wealthy to give. And honestly, when I think about even the foundations, some of the most meaningful gifts that we've made were not super huge, 7-figure gifts, right? I think that if we, ask ourselves how change happened, it's usually much more micro, right? It's an individual who's played an important role in another individual's life and encouraged them to do something, and then you can see the trickle effect, right? When that person has a family and or goes on to lead a something or do whatever. That's really how change happens. And so that can't be done top down. That can't be done, you can't put a handful of billionaires in a room and expect those kinds of meaningful interactions to happen, especially in the areas, that I was talking about before, which in my opinion are the communities that have the highest potential, right? We've got a lot of high potential neighborhoods where a little bit of change will go a long way if we invest in people. And there's oftentimes no proximity or very little proximity between, the very wealthy and those people in those communities.
And Arnie, I want you to kind of touch on that as well, the idea of just breaking down the idea that I can't give because I don't have a lot of money, right? Like there's still ways you can help out and give back to your community in various ways, right?
Absolutely. Prescott, the thing that comes to mind, which occurred during COVID, was when I talked with the food bank, one of the things they needed was people. And finding retired folks and folks from the community that were willing to step out and start packaging food and delivering it and taking I actually talked to a group that were doing a pantry over off of the south side of Fort Worth, and they needed help with refrigeration trucks, and we were able to mobilize trucks and get those over there. So a lot of times it's not really the money, it's finding the match of need and people to be able to fill those needs. And it's really, again, it's a team where you have, like in a business, you have to have a team of people working to find a solution.
And we had a couple questions that came in while you all were talking just now. So we had one interesting question that came from Juan Cabrera. Thank you for your question, Juan. And he says, many people have a distrust that some places might not allocate their money to the people they're supposed to help. How can people be reassured that their money is going to the right people? Dr. Ramos, I want you to just take a second to give some insight into helping people, ways that people can make sure that their money is going to the places that they actually want it to.
Thank you for that question, Juan. And I think it's a good one, right? I think there's just an inherent distrust in philanthropy because it was built in the framework of white supremacy, like so many other things in our country and in the world, frankly. And so, of course, there's going to be an inherent distrust because it lives in that system. I think one of the best ways to do this is to go to the source, right? Like, I think that, what I mentioned earlier, the Southern Power Fund, your local folks on the ground that are doing this work, your local community foundations, your local family foundations, going to the source on the ground and getting that money directly to folks when they need it, and path of least resistance, right? Like, why give to these larger organizations who may or may not filter down? I mean, we've all heard the horror stories of the large foundations or large, folks who are collecting money for a particular cause and only getting a percentage of it actually going to the people in need. I think the best way to circumvent that is to go directly to the source. So, as an example, during the situation with the climate and the freeze situation earlier this year, in Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and all the way to Tennessee, we went right to folks. I mean, we were literally like putting people in hotel rooms, and their families in hotel rooms who did not have working water or heat. We were, sending trucks of water into folks so that they could have, fresh water, because some of them were without water for over a month. So, when you're going right to the source and you're getting money to the people on the ground, they're actually getting the money. And I think if that is a concern, if you are someone who wants to give, that is almost generally always the best way to ensure that your money is going to who it's supposed to be going to.
And I also want to follow that up with another question that we got during our conversation from Leslie Mack. And Jeremy, I think this is something you might want to talk about, because we're going to talk about it in a few minutes as well. Leslie said that she recently read a story about the rediscovery of a lynching in the 1920s in Fort Worth. The story seems to cry out historical disparities in economics, law, and healthcare. Should something like this give philanthropists an impetus to acknowledge our hidden past and work to ameliorate these disparities? What do you think about that, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should, and I think in our case it did. I think when we first heard about the story, and then a group of community members who wanted to acknowledge that history and create a memorial for that history and some education around it. We thought it was really great. I mean, I think that we liked it because it was kind of an organic, something that organically came out of the community, and it was something that obviously we need to understand our history, or else we will be doomed to repeat it in various forms of fashion going forward. So yes, I love the question. I very much agree.
And I wanted to talk about the impact that giving has on building relationships in local communities. And Jeremy, when you think about reclaiming the space, about the Fred Ross Memorial Park, that's something that you all supported throughout 2020 and are pushing for. What was so meaningful to you about having people of color reclaim this space in Fort Worth?
Well, I think, for us, I think it, I personally believe that, reclaiming history, as you say, or understanding and acknowledging history is important for communities who, want to cast a vision for something different. If there are certain topics that are taboo, that can't be talked about, or just aren't known, it's really hard to see how communities can push forward. It's hard for me to say that a community needs that, but when it happens within when a group of community members come together and say this is what we want, that's kind of a no-brainer for us to support that sort of effort.
And actually, since we're in this portion of our conversation, the Rainwater Charitable Foundation helped DNAWorks purchase the land at the corner of 12th Street and Samuels Avenue in Fort Worth, where the racial terror and lynching was documented, and it's a part of Fort Worth's history. And so we also had TCU Magazine do a very short profile with former TCU star and NFL Hall of Fame running back LaDainian Tomlinson, one of my favorite running backs of all time. I just got to say that. When he visited the former Ku Klux Klan Hall in Fort Worth that DNAWorks hopes to purchase, and they want to turn that into a community arts center and name it after Fred Rouse. So let's take a quick look at that video and hear what LT had to say.
As long as I've lived here, I've never heard about this story. And so I had to come out here and learn more about it and really just educate myself so that I can educate other people about the story. At TCU, we talk about the university being the University of Fort Worth. If we're going to be the University of Fort Worth, we have to tell these types of stories.
All right. Now, I want to remind everybody watching that you can actually read more about that story and the fabulous efforts of DNAWorks to revive the memory of Fred Rouse in the latest issue of TCU Magazine. And you can also find that story online as well at magazine.tcu.edu. So, now that we're talking about the impact of giving, some people want to feel reassured that they're making a difference when they're giving. Ms. Parker, when you think about making someone feel reassured that their money or their time is actually making a difference in the community, what is some advice you give to them to kind of make sure that they can stick with it and continue to push through and keep helping?
That is a very good question. So I think that if you're doing you're doing something in your community, you need to have you need to be able to see them face to face, or you see the works that they're doing. So it's kind of hard to answer, but I know the organizations, the small organizations, the ones that are really doing a lot of good work, they are the ones in the community that if I'm giving to them, I will stay in contact with them. I'll be there helping. I will, be in contact with them if they have a newsletter or if they have activities. I'm there because I want to see what my gift to them is doing, because I'm sure they're going to do very well and they're going to take it. They're very appreciative, but I stay in contact with them. And I think that's the only way, you can do is stay in contact with them and keep up with them. You can't just give and walk away. You have to stay engaged with them.
Absolutely.
Right. And Arnie, I kind of want you to chime in there as well. You and your wife have been philanthropists for quite a while. So what do you tell people who are just getting into the idea of giving when they want to make sure that they're making a difference?
Well, first, I just want to say that, like Ms. Parker, I get a little bit edgy about being called a philanthropist. I just believe I'm somebody committed to helping. And Harriet and I look at it very simply that whatever is piquing our interest, we have friends and we talk to them about and share these thoughts together first, and find people who also have common interests. And one particular that comes to mind, a very close friend of mine called me because of my experience in fundraising and said, Presbyterian Night Shelter is going to do a program for a new women's center, and I want you to come help, and I want you to bring people with you, and I want you to contact people. So we sat down for weeks and went over a list and tried to identify people who might have a common interest. As a result, there's a beautiful new women's shelter here, and now we've got a beautiful new men's shelter. So those are the kind of things, and we keep in contact very much so with both the donors and the people on the line there at the communities, the center. And that's just a good example of that kind of community effort.
And hearing you all talk about this and the amount of time that you all spend with talking to people, meeting people, planning, Jeremy, what message can you give to people to show them that there's actually a lot of good feelings and reassurance that you can get from not just giving money, but being a part of those kind of conversations?
Well, I guess I think for me, and I just want to agree, I think what Paula and Arnie, I think, are saying, and that is, the way to feel reassured is to have, is to focus on relationships and proximity. And it doesn't mean you have to be in whatever the organization's business every single day, but I think if for people who are wanting to get involved in philanthropy, I'd have two pieces of advice. One is to get proximate, find some relationships in the area in which you really want to, meet a couple people, get and start to understand. And then once you have that proximity and trust built, you'll start to understand kind of how things are going, and they don't move in a linear way. So it's not necessarily going to get better and better every single year. It's not like an investment in Exxon Mobil, or I shouldn't say Exxon, but some other corporate company. Sometimes there's going to be good years and down years, but over the years, you'll start to see the impact of your giving. And then the other thing I would say is this is something that's new that's happened across the country is giving circles where, I can only do so much as one individual, but if I got together with 11 other 12 like-minded people, there's 12 of us and we have similar interests. I could be the point person from one organization and my 11 friends can be a point person, and when we pool our resources, we can make more meaningful change. And of course, as Arnie mentioned, we can, use all of our networks to huddle and really make a difference when there's something big like the Women's Center, which is a wonderful facility that PNS has put in our community. That would be my second recommendation is to there's joy in giving, and then there's even more joy in giving collectively.
Right.
And we had a question that came in from someone watching. So this is another question from Leslie. Thank you for your question, Leslie. Leslie has been on it today. The question is for Mr. Gachman. So in particular, she wants to know, did the pandemic alter your vision for the medical school and its outreach to communities who may be most at risk?
Not really. I think that the vision of our med school is tailored to the entire community. I don't think that we were trying at any point to make it a more focused to any one entity. Ironically, I think the lead teaching hospital in Fort Worth was John Peter Smith for many, many years, the Charitable Hospital. And I think that the students, a very interesting thing that probably you all aren't aware of, that UNT Health Science Center is the most diverse medical school in the United States. And that was the challenge to TCU. And I made that challenge to them. I said, we need to be able to have multiple levels of people coming here from all backgrounds, all types of people. And let's use that strength to build TCU's diversity. And let's do that for our community as well. And so when we reach out with med school, I think you noticed they were out on the line all across our community, not in just one specific area.
Right. And, I wanted to talk about, things that touch you all and make you all want to give. Dr. Ramos, alternate routes is something that has a specific purpose and a specific mission. How, for you finding your purpose with that mission, what advice can you give to someone else to kind of inspire them to have that sentiment about something else, right? Because we need people with that sentiment in like a lot of different areas in the world to make this total difference when we look at the whole picture. So I would just like to hear your advice on that.
Ooh, that's a tough question. I think, this is going to sound very cliche, but, you have to find what moves you. I think about my own career and, the options on the table for me. I was the first in my family to graduate from college. I amassed a great number of degrees, and I got through all that and realized that didn't matter because all of that wasn't feeding my soul, and it wasn't speaking to the things that matter to me the most as someone who has spent her life committed to social justice and issues of race and gender inequality and equity. And so, I walked away from all of that to be in a space where I could do the work that is meaningful to me. And I want to recognize I'm privileged to be able to do that because not everybody has that privilege to be able to follow their passion, to be able to do the work that they want to do. But I think that, as a lot of other folks on this call today have been saying, there are ways that you can find your way to be in those spaces, whether it's actually working for a nonprofit organization or serving on the board of a nonprofit organization, or frankly, just being a supporter and a donor of the work that's happening. We sometimes joke a little bit, amongst ourselves, but it's actually really true that, a lot of folks feel a way about getting monies from these big foundations, but we have to remember that the money in these foundations were built on the back of brown and Black people. So this is our money anyway. So you shouldn't feel a way about it because our people's blood, sweat, and tears went into the formulation of creating that wealth. And so when you think about things in that way and you kind of reframe sort of how these things are all set up, I think you find an ease and a way into things that help you to feel better about, what you're doing and how you're showing up in the world.
And Ms. Parker, what has inspired you to give for such a long period of time?
Like I said, I've had money to give, but we gave our time and we gave our resources to our neighbors, our church members. So I grew up in a family that said, and so did my husband, Ron, if you have it, then you need to also share and give too. So that has been our inspiration. We have continued. We kind of narrowed our focus because you get to a point where when people see that you're giving, you get asked by 1,000,000 organizations that don't mean anything to you, just does not make your heart beat. So we sat down and we talked, and we had some focus areas, and our focus areas became where we did our giving, because that was our passion. That's what we wanted to do. And that's where we wanted to see our dollars go to help out. So that's how we did it. And that's why we still do it.
And Jeremy, what is your approach? Like, I just kind of like what Ms. Parker said, that when people realize that you're giving, organizations from all over will try to approach you and ask you to give, right? And everyone does have that feeling like, I want to help as many people as possible. But when you think about from an organizational standpoint, how do you know you're reaching out to the right people for your cause?
Well, I think it's very similar to what Paula said. I mean, what we try to do is just really be clear about what we, the impact, the vision that we have for children that we co-create, if you will, with members in the community. And once we have that vision, we try to stay aligned to it, right? You can't be everything to everyone. And so as much as you can keep kind of on that focus, the better.
And
which means saying no a lot. I mean, that's really the job, right? I mean, you got people doing great.
So
really
I guess, Jeremy,
since
you brought that up, in the midst of this conversation, when you're thinking about giving, let's just have this part of the conversation. Arnie, when it's time to say no, right? Because it's not something that you think aligns with what you want to do. How do you approach that and actually still do it in a way where it's not like you're tearing anybody down, but it's like you actually want to use your resources for something else that needs your help just as well?
Wow. Well, my wife accuses me of not being able to say no. So you have to understand that's a tough one. But no, I think the reality of that is much like what Jeremy said. I've tried to focus my giving in the areas of healthcare in recent years. However, I have multiple ways of defining that. And as well as my other part of my giving is, of course, to my religious giving, which I have been doing ever since I was a small boy. So I was taught charity. I was taught to believe that you give and you don't say no to people, that basically you try to find some way to help. And in some cases, it's basically sharing with them an opportunity or a vision of someone else that may be able to help them. Directing them to another need or another place. It's not easy to tell people no when it's really a valid and very, very important thing that they're asking. So it's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, I guess the silver lining in that is that if you say no and you know the person is giving, then the silver lining is that money is actually going to go somewhere else where somebody does need help, right? So nobody actually loses in the scheme of that. You're still giving, but I'm going to give it in a different place. And that's kind of like the big picture kind of way to think about giving, right? Because we need it.
There's another part to it, Scott, and that is that there's a quid pro quo. because in many cases, someone will come to me and say, look, I need you to give to this because I gave to you. So you've got to remember that's part of the game too.
Okay. And, you know, I want to kind of like close our conversation with a story. I'm a natural storyteller, so I love stories and I love hearing people's stories. Dr. Ramos, is there a person who has been in your life that has kind of changed your life as far as giving is involved?
Thank you for that question. Who has changed my life as far as giving is involved?
Or maybe is there someone whose life that you've changed by giving and you've actually gotten to see that play out?
I mean, I'm going to go back to the Southern Power Fund. I think for me, that personal experience over the course of the past 9 to 10 months has been life-changing. To recognize how we're able to operate outside of philanthropy and provide funding to folks that is meaningful, and that honestly, for many of them, was the largest amount of money they've ever received in their history, right? So seeing what we were able to do as a community, as a coalition of folks who have been committed to this work and in partnership for decades, it just gave me hope that there are ways we can decolonize philanthropy and move forward in a way that moves outside of the white supremacist structures of which philanthropy was built on.
And Ms. Parker, is there someone or a story you can share about, you know, something that you've given to and you've been able to see that come to fruition for someone?
I had myself on mute. Sorry about that. For me, you know, college, and I'm a first generation college graduate also. So for me to go to college, I had a lot of grants and a lot of scholarships, you know, a bunch of little things that helped me get through school. And so I feel like all of that, and I don't know who all of that was, who all of those people were, but that's what gave me the opportunity to go to college, go to TCU, and build the relationships that I have. So therefore, I feel like scholarship and education is important for me to give back to someone else who was, you know, a younger me back in high school when I'm looking to go to college. Because I'm gonna tell you, when I found out what the cost of college was and told my family, they were like, what? No. You can't do that. But I was determined. I was going to figure out a way. And I found out about scholarships through, you know, my high school counselor, scholarships and grants. So yeah, I give back because it was given to me.
And Arnie, I'll give you the last crack at sharing the story. I know you can obviously say our fabulous medical students are a portion of giving that you're seeing come to fruition, but has there been anybody else that has had a story that's kind of touched you and, you know, you realize that your giving actually helped them?
Well, besides the medical school, the one that comes to mind was I was asked and my wife and I gave in memory of my mother, who was a 40-year breast cancer survivor, a piece of art at a meditation center at Baylor All Saints, Scott and White. And at the time I gave it, I thought, well, I'm not sure that this is really the best thing to do. I mean, this is a nice gesture, but it really doesn't help people. And so about 2 months later, I get a phone call from a woman who said to me, I cannot tell you how much this meant to me, that when I went into the meditation garden after being diagnosed with breast cancer, that I knew someone cared because your name was there, and it's someone I know, and I cannot tell you the feelings that I share with you now for thanking you for being there with me. So I think those are the kind of things that sometimes the inadvertent way we give is so meaningful to other people.
All right. And on that note, that's a wonderful story, Arnie, and thank you for sharing that with us. And I just want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us from the TCU and UNT-HSC School of Medicine and TCU Magazine, for joining us for this discussion about the impact of giving and how philanthropy remains an important part of building relationships between community members. I also want to give a very, very special thanks to our guests, Arnold Gachman, Paula Parker, Dr. Michelle Ramos, and Jeremy Smith, and also our partners in TCU University Advancement, the TCU Alumni Association, and also DNAWorks. We definitely appreciate you all taking the time to have this important conversation and just get this good information out into the world. So thank you for that. All right, I want to let everybody know, if you want more information about the TCU and UNT-HSC School of Medicine, you can visit us at mdschool.tcu.edu. And if you want to read more content from TCU Magazine, you can visit magazine.tcu.edu. Join TCU's vision for its future at leadon.tcu.edu/campaign. Be inspired by the many arts and social justice programs that are being held by DNAWorks as well. And you can visit them at DNAWorks.org. All right, I want to make sure that you all join us at the TCU and UNT-HSC School of Medicine on our Facebook page on June 16th. At 10 a.m., our next FWMD live chat, we will celebrate Juneteenth with Fort Worth native and activist Opal Lee, and we'll also talk about healthcare disparities facing African Americans with a few of our faculty physicians as well. Now that will do it for today's show, and I want to thank everyone for watching and joining us. We'll see you soon.